Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest stories. The summer of 1981 hung heavy over the small town of Pinewood Creek, nestled in the pine-covered foothills of rural Oregon, a place where strangers were few and locals knew the rhythms of life by heart. July 15th, a Wednesday, the kind of day where the temperature pushed 90 degrees by noon and the asphalt on Main Street softened under the relentless sun. A day when most locals retreated to the shade of their porches with tall glasses of iced tea, their Westinghouse window units humming in desperate competition with the heat. 22-year-old Jessica Harmon had just graduated from Portland State with a teaching degree. She wore her brown hair feathered back like Farrah Fawcett and drove a butter-yellow Ford Pinto that backfired when she pushed it past 50. Jessica had dreams that stretched beyond Pinewood Creek. She wanted to join the Peace Corps, to see the corners of the world that existed only in the pages of her National Geographic collection. But first, she had promised her widowed mother one last summer at home before spreading her wings. That Wednesday afternoon, Blondie's Call Me played on KPNE radio as Jessica kissed her mother goodbye on the cheek. She was heading up to Silver Lake for a weekend camping trip with friends from college. The drive would take her past the Crossroads Tavern, an establishment that sat alone at the junction of Highway 27 and the old logging road. The tavern was run by the Blackwood brothers, Raymond and Edgar, local fixtures, known for serving stiff drinks and asking few questions. "I'll call you from the campsite payphone when I get there," Jessica told her mother, jingling the quarters in her pocket. "Should be around 6 or 7, depending on traffic." Her mother, Ellen, stood in the doorway of their modest ranch-style home, the screen door propped open with a brick, watching as her daughter loaded the last of her camping gear into the trunk. Ellen would later recall how Jessica's turquoise friendship bracelet caught the sunlight as she waved goodbye, how her daughter's favorite 8-track tape of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors was playing in the car, and how she had reminded Jessica to drive carefully on the winding mountain roads. "The world needs teachers like you, Jess," were Ellen's final words to her daughter. "Come back safe." By 9 that evening, when no call had come from the campsite payphone, Ellen dialed the rotary phone in her kitchen, fingers trembling as she called Jessica's friends one by one. None had seen her. By 10:30, Ellen had contacted the Pinewood Creek Sheriff's Department, where Deputy Jim Rollins took the report, though he gently reminded her that adults couldn't be declared missing until 24 hours had passed. "She probably just got a flat tire, Ellen," he said, his voice crackling over the phone line. "Or maybe the campsite payphone is out of order. Those things break down all the time." But Jessica Harmon never arrived at Silver Lake. She never called her mother from the campsite payphone. She never taught a classroom full of eager children. And she never joined the Peace Corps to see the far corners of the earth. Jessica Harmon vanished somewhere along the 30 miles of highway between her mother's home and Silver Lake, becoming another missing person photo on a corkboard, another file folder in a cabinet that would, for many years, gather dust. What happened to Jessica that summer afternoon would remain a mystery for nearly 4 decades, a case that would grow cold in the shadow of the Crossroads Tavern, where the Blackwood brothers continued serving whiskey to weary travelers. A case too disturbing for the true crime shows that would one day populate streaming services like Netflix. A case that would reveal how sometimes the monsters don't hide in the shadows, but stand in plain sight, pouring drinks and making small talk while harboring the darkest of secrets. The morning after Jessica's disappearance dawned cloudy and uncharacteristically cool for mid-July. Sheriff Bill Harding, a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper mustache and 15 years on the job, began coordinating search efforts along Highway 27. Ellen Harmon had provided them with a recent photograph of Jessica, a wallet-sized print from her college graduation just weeks earlier. The image was photocopied on the department's new Xerox machine, a recent acquisition that Sheriff Harding took particular pride in and distributed to deputies and volunteers. She was last seen driving a 1978 yellow Ford Pinto, Oregon license plate JHT 743, Sheriff Harding announced to the group gathered in the department's wood-paneled briefing room, cigarette smoke hanging in thin blue layers beneath the fluorescent lights. Keep your eyes peeled for the vehicle. Could be she pulled off somewhere, had car trouble. Check the ravines, too. Those mountain roads can be tricky. By mid-afternoon, the search party had found nothing. No skid marks indicating an accident. No sign of the yellow Pinto. Jessica Harmon had simply vanished somewhere between her mother's driveway and Silver Lake. Deputy Rollins expanded the search to include local businesses along the route, showing Jessica's photograph to clerks and attendants. At the Texaco station, 10 miles out of town, the attendant, a teenager named Billy Mercer, remembered seeing the yellow Pinto. Yeah, she stopped for gas around 4, he told Rollins, wiping his hands on a red rag that hung from his back pocket. Filled up, paid cash, bought a Coke from the machine outside. She seemed fine, happy even. Said she was heading up to the lake for the weekend. 2 miles further up the highway, at Donna's Diner, a waitress recalled seeing Jessica stop in for a quick bathroom break and a coffee to go. Pretty girl, the waitress said. Had one of those new Sony Walkmans. Said she was meeting friends at the lake, but beyond the diner the trail went cold. None of the other businesses along the route recalled seeing Jessica or her distinctive yellow car. The last known location where anyone had seen Jessica Harmon alive was Donna's Diner at approximately 4:15 on the afternoon of July 15, 1981. From there, she would have driven past the Crossroads Tavern, the final establishment before the winding road climbed into the mountains towards Silver Lake. Sheriff Harding and Deputy Rollins visited the tavern that evening. The Blackwood brothers, Raymond and Edgar, stood behind the weathered wooden bar, Raymond polishing glasses, while Edgar tallied the day's receipts with a pencil stub and ledger book. The tavern smelled of stale beer and cigarettes, country music playing softly from a Panasonic radio behind the bar. A few locals nursed drinks in the dim corners, barely glancing up as the lawman entered. Evening, Sheriff, Raymond Blackwood nodded, setting aside the glass he'd been polishing. At 42, Raymond was the elder brother, broad-shouldered with a receding hairline and a carefully trimmed beard. He had served in Vietnam, though he rarely spoke of it. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Harding showed the brothers Jessica's photograph. "Either of you see this girl yesterday afternoon? Driving a yellow Pinto, heading toward Silver Lake?" The brothers studied the photograph. Edgar, younger by 3 years, leaner and clean-shaven with a permanent squint to his right eye from a childhood accident, shook his head. "A lot of people pass through here, Sheriff." "Can't say I recall her specific. You sure?" Harding pressed. "Pretty girl like this would stand out." Raymond handed the photograph back. "We were busy yesterday. Logging crew from up north stopped in. Got pretty rowdy. If she drove by, we wouldn't have noticed from inside." "She stop in here?" "That's what I'm asking you," Sheriff Harding said. "Then no," Raymond replied. "Don't recall her coming in. We'd remember." Sheriff Harding made notes in a small spiral pad he carried in his shirt pocket, his government-issue ballpoint pen scratching against the paper. "All right, if you think of anything, you call the station right away." The Blackwood brothers nodded in unison. "Hope you find her," Edgar said, returning to the ledger. "Terrible thing when someone goes missing." As the days turned into weeks, the search for Jessica Harmon continued. Volunteers combed the forests and gullies along Highway 27. Deputies checked abandoned buildings and interviewed locals. Jessica's photograph appeared on bulletin boards, in shop windows, on telephone poles, and in the Pinewood Creek Gazette. Her story made the evening news in Portland, a brief segment showing Ellen Harmon pleading for information about her daughter's whereabouts, but no witnesses came forward. No one reported seeing the yellow Pinto beyond Donna's Diner. The case yielded no suspects, no motives, no leads, just questions that hung in the air like the summer heat, suffocating in their persistence. August came and went. Summer faded into fall, and the search efforts dwindled. Jessica's friends returned to their lives, their graduate programs, their first teaching jobs. Ellen Harmon kept her daughter's room exactly as she had left it, the collection of National Geographic magazines still stacked neatly on the desk, the Peace Corps application half completed in the top drawer. Sheriff Harding assigned the case to Deputy Rollins, who followed what few leads emerged. all of which led nowhere. The file grew thicker with witness statements and search reports, but no conclusions. By Thanksgiving, the Jessica Harmon case had gone cold, joining the ranks of unsolved mysteries that haunted the filing cabinets of small-town sheriff departments across America. Life in Pinewood Creek returned to its normal rhythms. The Blackwood brothers continued serving whiskey to travelers at the Crossroads Tavern. And somewhere in the dense forests surrounding Highway 27, the truth about what happened to Jessica Harmon on that July afternoon in 1981 remained hidden, waiting to be discovered. As 1981 gave way to 1982, Ellen Harmon kept her daughter's memory alive through handwritten letters to the sheriff's department pleading for continued investigation. She photocopied flyers at the local library for 25 cents a page and distributed them herself on weekends, driving the route Jessica should have taken that day, stopping at gas stations and diners to refresh the fading images on their bulletin boards. On the first anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, Ellen organized a candlelight vigil at the Pinewood Creek Community Church. Nearly 200 people attended, holding white tapers that dripped wax onto the church steps as they sang "Amazing Grace" in the summer darkness. The Pinewood Creek Gazette ran a front-page story with a black-and-white photograph of the vigil, the candles appearing as tiny stars against the night. "We won't forget," Ellen told the gathered crowd, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "Someone knows something. Someone saw something that day. Please, if you're out there, come forward. I just want to bring my daughter home." But as the Reagan years progressed and America embraced a new era of excess and optimism, the case of Jessica Harmon faded from public consciousness. The vigils grew smaller each year. The flyers yellowed and curled at the edges. New tragedies captured the town's attention, and new faces filled the sheriff's department as retirements and promotions changed the landscape of local law enforcement. Sheriff Harding retired in 1986, handing the badge to a younger man with new ideas and different priorities. Deputy Rawlins transferred to the state police in 1987, taking with him the institutional knowledge of the Harmon case. The file, now a thick manila folder stuffed with reports and interviews, was relegated to the department's basement archives, where it sat on a metal shelf alongside other unsolved cases. Through it all, the Blackwood brothers remained a constant presence at the Crossroads Tavern. Raymond, approaching 50, had developed a paunch and a reputation for harsh treatment of unruly patrons. Edgar, still lean and quick to smile, handled most of the customer interaction, while Raymond managed the books. The tavern prospered through the economic downturns that affected much of rural Oregon, a testament to the brothers' business acumen and the steady stream of travelers passing through on Highway 27. In 1988, as MTV dominated youth culture and Michael Jackson's Bad topped the charts, Ellen Harmon made her weekly call to the sheriff's department. Speaking with a deputy who had never met her daughter and knew the case only as an entry in the cold case log. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying, ending with the standard promise to look into any new leads that might develop. There were no new leads. The yellow Pinto remained unfound. Jessica remained missing. As the 80s gave way to the 90s, Ellen Harmon's health began to decline. The weight of grief and uncertainty had taken its toll, manifesting in high blood pressure and a heart condition that required regular medication. Still, every July 15th, she placed a memorial notice in the Pinewood Creek Gazette, a small black-bordered square with Jessica's graduation photo and the words "Missing, Not Forgotten." The Crossroads Tavern changed little over the years, an anachronism in an evolving world. While other businesses embraced computers and digital cash registers, Raymond Blackwood still kept the tavern's books by hand, entering each day's sales in the same style of ledger he had used since taking over the place with his brother in the late 70s. The tavern had no ATM, no credit card machine, no fax line. Cash only, as the hand-painted sign above the bar proclaimed. Edgar Blackwood remained unmarried, living in the apartment above the tavern, while Raymond had a small house a quarter-mile down the logging road. Neither brother talked much about their past, and locals had learned not to ask. They were fixtures in the community, reliable if not particularly beloved, their tavern a landmark that had stood at the crossroads for as long as most could remember. The brothers' routine rarely varied. Open at noon, close at midnight. Raymond handled the morning deliveries and banking, while Edgar managed the afternoon and evening shifts. On Mondays, when the tavern was closed, they went fishing at different lakes in the area, returning with coolers full of trout that Edgar would fry up as specials during the week. In December of 1995, Ellen Harmon died of a heart attack in her sleep. She was buried next to her husband in the Pinewood Creek Cemetery, leaving behind a house still preserved as a shrine to her missing daughter. With no other family to claim the property, the house was sold at auction, its contents packed away in storage by a court-appointed executor. Jessica's National Geographic collection, her half-completed Peace Corps application, her collection of vinyl records and 8-track tapes, all boxed and labeled, then forgotten in a storage unit on the edge of town. The investigation into Jessica's disappearance, already cold for over a decade, froze solid with Ellen's death. The last person who cared deeply about solving the case was gone. The file remained in the basement archives, gathering dust alongside evidence boxes containing items from the initial investigation, photocopies of Jessica's photograph, maps marked with search grids, interview transcripts from that summer of 1981. By the turn of the millennium, as Y2K fears subsided and a new century dawned, most of Pinewood Creek had forgotten about Jessica Harmon. New generations grew up without knowing her story. Highway 27 was widened and repaved, changing the landscape of the route she had driven that July day. Donna's Diner closed when its owner retired. The Texaco station, where Jessica had last been seen, became a Chevron, then an independent gas mart. Only the Crossroads Tavern remained unchanged, the Blackwood brothers, now in their 60s, but still serving whiskey to travelers. Raymond's hair had turned completely white, his beard now fuller to hide the sagging skin of his neck. Edgar had developed a slight stoop, his once quick movements now measured and deliberate. They rarely spoke of retirement, seemingly content to continue as they always had, day after day, year after year. And somewhere in the forests surrounding Highway 27, Jessica Harmon's secrets remained buried, waiting for someone to unearth the truth that had eluded justice for nearly 4 decades, waiting for the past to finally catch up with the present. The spring of 2019 brought change to the Pinewood Creek Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Diane Rodriguez, a veteran officer who had worked her way up through the ranks over 20 years, initiated a comprehensive review of all cold cases in the department's jurisdiction. A newly formed cold case unit consisting of Detective Marcus Wells and forensic specialist Dr. Leah Chen began the painstaking process of cataloging and digitizing decades of files stored in the department's basement archives. Detective Wells, 42 and recently transferred from Seattle, specialized in unsolved homicides and disappearances. His reputation for solving long-dormant cases had earned him both accolades and the opportunity to build the cold case unit from the ground up. Dr. Chen, 35 with a Ph.D. in forensic science and experience at the State Crime Lab, brought expertise in modern DNA analysis and evidence preservation techniques. On a rainy Tuesday in April, Detective Wells pulled a thick manila folder from a metal shelf in the archives. The tab read, Harmon Jessica missing, 7/15/1981. Inside, he found yellowing incident reports, witness statements typed on an IBM Selectric, black and white photographs paper-clipped to interview transcripts, and hand-drawn maps of search areas along Highway 27. This one's interesting, Wells told Dr. Chen, laying the file contents on a table in their basement workspace. 22-year-old female, disappeared on her way to a camping trip. Last seen at a diner about 15 miles out of town. Never found her or her car. Dr. Chen examined a photocopy of Jessica's graduation picture, the image degraded through multiple generations of copying. Do we have any physical evidence? Wells checked the file inventory. Evidence box H81-15 should be here somewhere. They located the cardboard box on a high shelf, sealed with evidence tape that had turned brittle with age. Inside were paper bags containing items collected during the initial investigation. A hairbrush from Jessica's bathroom, fingerprint cards from her bedroom and car, soil samples from areas of interest along the highway. Not much to work with, Dr. Chen observed, but we might get lucky with DNA. Over the next several weeks, Wells and Chen immersed themselves in the Harmon case. They digitized the entire file, enhancing old photographs, transcribing handwritten notes, and creating a comprehensive timeline of Jessica's last known movements. They revisited the witness statements, noting inconsistencies and gaps that hadn't been followed up on by the original investigators. The hairbrush yielded several strands of hair with intact follicles, from which Dr. Chen was able to extract a DNA profile for Jessica Harmon. She entered the profile into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, hoping for a match against unidentified remains found in the decades since Jessica's disappearance. No matches came back. Detective Wells tracked down former Deputy Jim Rollins, now in his 70s, and living in a retirement community near Portland. Though Rollins' memory had faded with age, he remembered the Harmon case vividly. "That one always bothered me," Rollins told Wells during their interview, conducted in the sunroom of Rollins' apartment. A tape recorder captured their conversation, a modern digital device, replacing the bulky cassette recorders of Rollins' era. "We never found any sign of her or the car. It was like she drove off the face of the earth." "Did you have any suspects?" Wells asked. Rollins hesitated. "Nothing concrete. Sheriff Harding had a feeling about those Blackwood brothers out at the Crossroads Tavern. Said they were hinky, but we never had anything to connect them to the girl. They claimed they never saw her." "The Blackwood brothers?" Wells made a note. "Are they still around?" "Far as I know, that tavern's been there forever. Wouldn't surprise me if they're still running it." Strange pair, those two. Kept to themselves mostly. Raymond was the one who really gave Harding pause. Had a temper. Did time in county before he and his brother took over the tavern. Bar fight gone bad, as I recall. This information wasn't in the case file. Wells pressed for more details, but Rollins's memory couldn't provide specific dates or incidents. Still, it was the first potential lead in a case that had gone cold before Wells was old enough to drive. Back at the department, Wells ran background checks on Raymond and Edgar Blackwood. Raymond's record showed arrests in the early 70s for assault and battery, with a 6-month county jail sentence in 1973. Nothing since then. Edgar had no criminal record. Both brothers were still listed as owners of the Crossroads Tavern, now operating for over 40 years at the same location. "I think we need to take a drive," Wells told Dr. Chen, closing his laptop. "See if these brothers remember anything about a yellow Pinto from 1981. The Crossroads Tavern looked much as it had decades earlier, a weathered wooden structure with a gravel parking lot. Sitting at the junction of Highway 27 and the old logging road, a neon Budweiser sign glowed in the front window, and pickup trucks lined the parking area. It was just past 5 in the afternoon when Detective Wells and Dr. Chen pulled up in an unmarked department SUV. Inside, the tavern smelled of fried food and beer, country music playing from speakers mounted in the corners. A dozen or so patrons sat at tables and along the bar, most turning to appraise the newcomers before returning to their conversations and drinks. Behind the bar stood an elderly man with stooped shoulders and a permanent squint to his right eye. Edgar Blackwood, now 80, but still tending bar as he had for decades. Wells and Chen took seats at the bar, ordering sodas. Edgar served them without much conversation, his movements deliberate and practiced. Wells noted the old-style cash register, the handwritten specials board, the distinct lack of technology that made the tavern feel frozen in time. "Been running this place long?" Wells asked conversationally, showing his badge discreetly. Edgar's expression remained neutral. "Since 78. My brother and I took it over when the previous owner passed. Your brother's still involved?" "Raymond passed 3 years ago." "Heart attack." Edgar's voice betrayed no emotion. "I keep the place going." "Habit, I suppose," Wells nodded sympathetically. "Sorry for your loss. I'm actually working on an old case from 1981. Young woman disappeared along this highway? Jessica Harmon, I believe the original investigators spoke with you and your brother back then. Edgar's hand paused briefly as he wiped the bar with a rag. A momentary hesitation so slight it might have been missed by someone not trained to notice such things. That was a long time ago, Edgar said finally. Don't recall much about it. A lot of people went missing in those days. Hitchhikers, runaways, different times. Wells showed Edgar an enhanced copy of Jessica's photograph, printed from the digitized file. She was driving a yellow Ford Pinto, last seen at Donna's Diner up the road. Would have passed by here. Edgar glanced at the photograph, then away. Like I said, don't recall. Nearly 40 years ago now. Mind if we look around the property? Sometimes fresh eyes see things others might have missed. Edgar's squint deepened. You'd need a warrant for that, wouldn't you? Unless you're just asking to poke around the public areas, Wells smiled. Just the public areas for now. Maybe the parking lot surrounding grounds. We're trying to be thorough with these cold cases, Edgar shrugged. Suit yourself. Not much to see. While Wells continued talking with Edgar, Dr. Chen stepped outside to explore the tavern grounds. The property backed up to dense forest with the old logging road running alongside it. Behind the tavern stood a storage shed and what appeared to be an old garage, both weathered and seemingly unused for years. Chen took photographs with her phone, documenting the layout. As she walked the perimeter of the property, she noticed something glinting in the dirt near the edge of the forest. Kneeling, she found a tarnished piece of metal partially buried in the soil. Using a pen from her pocket, she carefully excavated the object, a key ring with a decorative peace symbol charm, popular in the late 70s and early 80s. Bagging the item, Chen continued her exploration, finding nothing else of note. When she rejoined Wells inside the tavern, Edgar Blackwood was serving other customers, his manner unchanged despite the investigator's presence. Find anything interesting? Wells asked quietly as they prepared to leave. Chen showed him the bagged key ring. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. Hard to say how long it's been out there. They thanked Edgar for his time and left the tavern, aware of his eyes following them to their vehicle. As they drove away, Wells shared his impressions. He's hiding something. The way he reacted to Jessica's photo, that wasn't just forgetting. That was deliberate evasion. You think he was involved? Chen asked. I don't know yet, but I think we need to dig deeper into the Blackwood brothers and that tavern. If Jessica Harmon passed by here that day, they might have been the last people to see her alive. Back at the department, Dr. Chen examined the key ring under proper lighting. The peace symbol charm was tarnished but intact, a popular item during the era when Jessica disappeared. More interestingly, there was a small tag attached to the ring with faded initials that appeared to be J.H. It could be coincidence, Chen told Wells, or it could be Jessica Harmon's. We need more to go on. Wells agreed. He began researching property records for the Crossroads Tavern and surrounding land, discovering that the Blackwood brothers had purchased not just the tavern, but 5 acres of surrounding forest in 1978. The property included the tavern, the outbuildings Chen had photographed, and a significant portion of woodland that backed up to national forest land. Further digging revealed that Raymond Blackwood had been arrested in 1973 after a bar fight in which he had severely beaten another man over an alleged insult. The victim had suffered permanent brain damage, and Raymond had served 6 months in county jail. Upon his release, he and Edgar had worked odd jobs before purchasing the Crossroads Tavern with what property records listed as cash considerations. The following day, Wells obtained a search warrant for the Crossroads Tavern property based on the discovery of the key ring and Edgar's suspicious behavior. A team including Wells, Chen, and 4 deputies arrived at the tavern just after noon, when Edgar was typically preparing to open for the day. Edgar answered their knock with visible surprise, his squint becoming more pronounced as Wells presented the warrant. "This is unnecessary," Edgar said, his voice steady despite the situation. "I told you I don't remember anything about that girl." "Then you won't mind if we have a look around," Wells replied. "It won't take long if there is nothing to find." The search began methodically. With teams assigned to the tavern interior, the outbuildings, and the surrounding property. Dr. Chen focused on the garage and storage shed behind the tavern, structures that appeared to have been unused for years. The garage door was secured with a rusted padlock that required bolt cutters to remove. Inside, amid years of dust and cobwebs, sat a vehicle covered with a heavy tarp. When the tarp was pulled back, revealing a butter-yellow Ford Pinto with Oregon plates, the search took on a new urgency. The license plate matched JHT 743, Jessica Harmon's car, hidden for nearly 4 decades in a garage behind the Crossroads Tavern. The interior was undisturbed, preserved like a time capsule. A Fleetwood Mac 8-track tape still sat in the player. A macrame purse rested on the passenger seat, containing Jessica's wallet, driver's license, and the collection of quarters she had intended to use for the campsite payphone. In the trunk, her camping gear remained packed, never used. Edgar Blackwood was immediately taken into custody. As deputies led him to a patrol car, his composure finally cracked. "It was Raymond," he said, his voice breaking. "It was always Raymond. I just helped clean up. I just helped hide the car. I never touched her." With Edgar in custody and the car secured as evidence, the search expanded to include ground-penetrating radar of the property. Behind the storage shed, in an area that had been planted with a dense stand of pine trees sometime in the early 80s, the radar detected an anomaly consistent with disturbed soil. The excavation began the following morning. 6 feet down, wrapped in a blue tarp sealed with duct tape, they found human remains. The clothing matched what Jessica had been wearing the day she disappeared, according to her mother's initial report. A turquoise friendship bracelet was still on the wrist bone. DNA testing would later confirm what everyone already knew. They had found Jessica Harmon. Edgar Blackwood, facing charges of accessory to murder and concealing evidence, agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for consideration during sentencing. His statement, recorded over 8 hours in an interview room at the Pinewood Creek Sheriff's Department, revealed the full horror of what had happened that July afternoon in 1981. According to Edgar, Jessica had stopped at the Crossroads Tavern asking to use the bathroom. Raymond, who had been drinking heavily that day, had attempted to flirt with her. When Jessica rebuffed him and tried to leave, Raymond flew into a rage, striking her repeatedly. The assault had escalated quickly, ending with Jessica unconscious and bleeding on the tavern floor. "He didn't mean to kill her," Edgar insisted during his statement, though his eyes told a different story. Raymond had these episodes sometimes since coming back from Vietnam. He'd just snap, and then it would be over, and he'd be calm again, like nothing happened. Together, the brothers had wrapped Jessica's body in a tarp and buried it behind the storage shed that night. They had hidden her car in the garage, intending to dispose of it later, but never finding a safe opportunity. As the years passed, the car became both evidence they couldn't risk moving and a macabre trophy that Raymond wouldn't allow Edgar to destroy. "Raymond would go out there sometimes, just sit in the car," Edgar said, his voice hollow. "He'd play that Fleetwood Mac tape and drink. Said it helped him remember. I wanted to get rid of it, especially after the police came asking questions, but he wouldn't let me. Said if we were careful, no one would ever find it." For nearly 40 years, the brothers had kept their secret. When investigators had questioned them initially, they had presented a united front of denial and misdirection. When Ellen Harmon placed her annual memorial notices in the newspaper, they had turned the page without comment. When Raymond died of a heart attack in 2016, Edgar had continued the charade alone, maintaining the tavern and its terrible secret out of habit and fear. The discovery of Jessica Harmon's remains and the revelation of her fate made national headlines. The story was featured on true crime television programs and podcasts, dissected by internet sleuths and professional criminologists alike. How had 2 brothers managed to hide such a terrible crime for nearly 4 decades in plain sight, serving drinks to travelers who never suspected the horror that had taken place within those walls? Edgar Blackwood's trial began in February of 2020. The courthouse in Pinewood Creek, a building that had seen little significant activity in decades, was suddenly the center of media attention. Journalists from Portland and beyond filled the gallery each day, alongside locals who had never forgotten Jessica Harmon and newer residents learning her story for the first time. The prosecution presented a methodical case built on Edgar's confession, the physical evidence from the garage and burial site, and forensic analysis conducted by Dr. Chen and her team at the State Crime Lab. DNA evidence confirmed Jessica's identity beyond any doubt. Soil analysis from the burial site matched soil found in the treads of work boots recovered from Edgar's apartment above the tavern. Most damning was the evidence that the brothers had planned ahead for such a scenario. The blue tarp that had wrapped Jessica's body was one of several purchased in 1979, according to receipts found in Raymond's house after his death. The stand of pine trees planted over the burial site had been deliberately positioned to conceal the disturbed ground, a fact confirmed by forestry experts who testified about the trees' age and arrangement. The defense argued that Edgar had been coerced by his older, more violent brother. Character witnesses testified about Raymond's volatile temper and Edgar's subservient nature. A psychiatrist specializing in codependent relationships explained how Edgar might have been manipulated and controlled by Raymond over decades, unable to break free from his brother's influence even after his death. But the jury was unconvinced. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts. Edgar Blackwood, now 81, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that, given his age, amounted to spending his final years behind bars. As Edgar was led from the courtroom, he looked back once at the gathered spectators, his right eye squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights. He made no statement, offered no apology. The secrets he and his brother had kept for nearly 40 years were finally exposed. But understanding the full truth of what had happened at the Crossroads Tavern that summer day in 1981 died with Raymond Blackwood. Edgar would take his portion of that truth to prison and eventually to his grave. For Detective Marcus Wells and Dr. Leah Chen, the successful resolution of the Harmon case marked just the beginning of their work with the cold case unit. The methods they had employed, digitizing old files, enhancing degraded photographs, applying modern DNA analysis to preserved evidence, and using ground-penetrating radar to locate remains, would become the blueprint for examining other unsolved cases in the department's archives. Jessica Harmon was finally laid to rest beside her parents in the Pinewood Creek Cemetery, nearly 4 decades after she had kissed her mother goodbye and driven off in her yellow Ford Pinto. The funeral, attended by hundreds of community members and covered by media outlets from across the state, provided a sense of closure that had been denied to Ellen Harmon in her lifetime. Among the mourners were several of Jessica's college friends, now in their 60s with grown children of their own. They shared stories of the vibrant young woman who had dreamed of teaching children and seeing the world, whose life had been cut tragically short on that summer day in 1981. They placed Peace Corps brochures and National Geographic magazines alongside flowers on her casket, symbolic of the dreams she never had the chance to pursue. The yellow Ford Pinto, after being thoroughly processed for evidence, was ultimately crushed and recycled. Detective Wells had suggested preserving it as a training tool for future investigators, but Sheriff Rodriguez had been firm in her decision. "Some things don't need to be preserved," she told Wells, as they watched the car being loaded onto a flatbed truck for transport to the scrapyard. "Some ghosts should be laid to rest." The Crossroads Tavern, scene of Jessica's murder and the brothers' decades-long deception, stood empty after Edgar's arrest. The property, seized as evidence in the investigation, remained in legal limbo for months following the trial. Ultimately, the county took possession through civil forfeiture, and a decision was made to demolish the structure rather than allow it to be reopened under new management. On a crisp October morning in 2020, a small crowd gathered to watch as excavators tore into the weathered wooden walls of the tavern. No one cheered as the building came down. There was only a solemn silence, a collective acknowledgement that an evil that had festered in their community for decades was finally being excised. In place of the tavern, the county established a roadside rest area with a small memorial garden dedicated to Jessica Harmon and other victims of unsolved crimes. A bronze plaque told Jessica's story and acknowledged the work of those who had never given up on finding the truth. The garden, planted with perennial flowers that would return year after year, served as a reminder that no matter how much time passed, the search for justice would continue. For Detective Wells, the Harmon case represented both a professional triumph and a sobering reminder of how easily justice could be delayed, perhaps indefinitely, without persistence and technological advancement. The case had fundamentally changed how the Pinewood Creek Sheriff's Department approached cold cases, establishing protocols that would guide investigations for years to come. Dr. Leah Chen published a paper in the Journal of Forensic Sciences detailing the methods used to preserve and analyze the 40-year-old evidence in the Harmon case. Her work became required reading for forensic science students, a case study in both the limitations of era-specific investigative techniques and the importance of proper evidence preservation for future technological advancements. The success of the Harmon case brought renewed attention and resources to other unsolved disappearances and murders in the region. Families who had lived with uncertainty for decades reached out to the Cold Case Unit, hoping their loved ones' cases might also be resolved through the application of modern forensic techniques to preserved evidence. Some found answers. Others continued to wait. In the years following Edgar Blackwood's conviction, more details emerged about the brothers' activities at the Crossroads Tavern. Former patrons came forward with stories of uncomfortable encounters, of Raymond's volatile temper, and Edgar's silent complicity. Some reported instances of drugged drinks, of waking up in their vehicles with no memory of the previous night, their wallets lighter, but themselves otherwise unharmed. Others recalled young women who had stopped at the tavern and commented on Raymond's inappropriate behavior, his intense staring, his refusal to take no for an answer. Most disturbing were the reports from longtime locals who had occasionally seen unfamiliar vehicles parked behind the tavern's garage. Vehicles that would appear for a few days and then vanish, never to be seen in the area again. These reports, combined with financial records showing cash deposits to the brothers' bank account that couldn't be explained by the tavern's legitimate business, led investigators to suspect that Jessica Harmon might not have been their only victim. In the spring of 2021, with Edgar Blackwood's health failing in prison, Detective Wells made one final attempt to extract additional information. He visited the state correctional facility where Edgar was serving his sentence, now confined to the prison infirmary with late-stage heart disease. Edgar, thin and pale against the white hospital sheets, his right eye still squinting, though now clouded with cataracts, showed little reaction when Wells entered his room. A guard stood by the door, though the elderly prisoner, connected to monitoring equipment and an oxygen tank, posed little physical threat. "I'm not here to cause you any more trouble, Edgar," Wells said, taking a seat beside the bed. "But there are other families out there, living with the same uncertainty that Ellen Harmon lived with for decades. They deserve answers, too." Edgar's gaze remained fixed on the ceiling. "I told you everything about the Harmon girl, but not about the others," Wells pressed gently. "We found records, Edgar, bank deposits, witnesses who saw other cars behind the tavern over the years, people who went missing along that highway." "Were there others?" For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of the oxygen tank. Finally, Edgar turned his head slightly toward Wells, his expression unreadable. "Raymond had a book," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A ledger separate from the tavern accounts. He kept it in a metal box under the floorboards in his bedroom." "The house is gone now, I suppose. We can find it," Wells assured him. "If it's there, we'll find it." Edgar closed his eyes. 1979 to 2003. 24 years. He stopped after he got sick the first time. Heart attack, like the one that killed him eventually. "Said it was a warning? How many, Edgar? How many people did you and Raymond kill?" Edgar's eyes remained closed. "I never killed anyone. I just helped afterward. Cleaned up. Hid things. The book will tell you the rest. Names, dates. Raymond was very methodical. 3 days later, Edgar Blackwood died in his sleep, taking many of his secrets with him. But the metal box was exactly where he had described it, buried beneath the charred remains of Raymond's house, which had burned down shortly after his death in what had been ruled an electrical fire, but now seemed suspiciously convenient. Inside the metal box, preserved from both fire and elements, was a leather-bound ledger with entries spanning from April 1979 to November 2003. Each entry included a date, initials, and various cryptic notations that appeared to reference disposal locations. 16 sets of initials in total, including J.H. with the date July 15, 1981. The Cold Case Unit, with assistance from the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, began the painstaking process of matching the initials and dates to missing persons reports from the corresponding time periods. The work was slow and methodical, much like the Blackwood brothers themselves had been in their decades of predation. By the end of 2022, they had identified 12 of the 16 victims, including Jessica Harmon. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they located remains in various locations throughout the forested areas surrounding the former tavern property and along the old logging road. In each case, the remains were wrapped in blue tarps sealed with duct tape, the brothers' signature method of disposal. The victims ranged in age from 19 to 34, all young women traveling alone on Highway 27. Some had been reported missing immediately, their disappearances generating brief periods of intense search and media coverage before fading from public consciousness. Others had been classified as runaways or voluntary disappearances, their cases receiving minimal investigation due to circumstances or the assumptions of era-specific law enforcement. As each victim was identified through DNA analysis and their remains returned to surviving family members for proper burial, Detective Wells and Dr. Chen attended the services. They stood at a respectful distance, witnesses to both the enduring pain of loss and the bittersweet relief of finally knowing the truth. For some families, the answers came too late. Parents had died, siblings had moved away, and the ceremonies were sparsely attended affairs organized by distant relatives or community members who remembered the missing. But for others, the resolution brought a measure of peace after decades of uncertainty. Wells would never forget the elderly father of Melissa Turner, reported missing in 1984 while driving to her first job interview after college, who had grabbed his hand at her funeral and said simply, "Now I can join her mother knowing what happened to our little girl." The Blackwood brothers case became one of the most significant serial killing investigations in Oregon history, not for the number of victims, which paled in comparison to more notorious killers, but for the duration of their activity and the length of time they had evaded justice. Criminologists and psychology researchers studied the case, fascinated by the brothers' relationship dynamic and their ability to maintain their deadly secret for so long in a small community where they were known to virtually everyone. The Pinewood Creek Sheriff's Department's Cold Case Unit, initially created as a temporary project with grant funding, was established as a permanent division within the department. Additional detectives were hired and trained in the methods that had proven successful in the Harmon case, and partnerships were formed with forensic labs and university research programs specializing in advanced DNA analysis and evidence preservation techniques. In 2023, on the second anniversary of the resolution of the Harmon case, Pinewood Creek dedicated a new wing of the Sheriff's Department building to house the expanded Cold Case Unit. A plaque in the entrance hallway featured a quote from Ellen Harmon, taken from one of her many letters to the department over the years. "Time doesn't erase the truth. It only hides it until someone cares enough to look." The Jessica Harmon Memorial Scholarship was established at Portland State University, providing financial assistance to students pursuing degrees in education with plans to work in underserved communities or join the Peace Corps after graduation. The scholarship, funded initially by donations from community members and supplemented by proceeds from a book about the case written by a local journalist, ensured that Jessica's dreams would live on through a new generation of teachers. Detective Marcus Wells continued leading the cold case unit until his retirement in 2028, by which time they had resolved an additional 14 previously unsolved cases using the techniques and protocols developed during the Harmon investigation. Dr. Leah Chen became the director of the State Forensic Laboratory, where she implemented innovative preservation methods and training programs for evidence technicians working with decades-old materials. The site where the Crossroads Tavern once stood became a place of remembrance rather than horror. The roadside rest area and memorial garden attracted visitors from across the country, some drawn by the notoriety of the case, others by a more personal connection to the victims or to similar unresolved losses in their own lives. Wildflowers bloomed each spring around the bronze plaque telling Jessica's story, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the darkness that had occupied that spot for so many years. Highway 27 was eventually rerouted slightly to accommodate a larger parking area for the memorial site, and the old logging road was closed to vehicle traffic, though a walking path remained for those who wished to visit the woodland areas now returned to their natural state. In the town of Pinewood Creek, the Harmon case became part of the community's collective history, taught in local schools as both a cautionary tale and an example of how justice, though delayed, could eventually prevail through persistence and scientific advancement. The annual candlelight vigil that Ellen Harmon had started decades earlier continued as a community tradition, though it evolved from a plea for information into a celebration of resolution and remembrance. For the 16 victims of the Blackwood brothers, identified and unidentified alike, the decades of silence had finally ended. Their stories were told, their remains properly laid to rest, their families granted the answers they had sought for so long. The truth, buried beneath layers of time and deliberate concealment, had finally emerged into the light. And for Jessica Harmon, the 22-year-old teacher with dreams of joining the Peace Corps and seeing the world, justice had finally come home. Nearly 4 decades after she kissed her mother goodbye and drove her yellow Ford Pinto past the Crossroads Tavern for the first and last time, the truth about her fate had been revealed. Her remains returned to the town she had been so eager to leave behind, her memory honored by a community that had never truly forgotten her. In the end, it wasn't just modern technology that had solved the case. It was the combination of preserved evidence from 1981, the fingerprint cards, the soil samples, the witness statements carefully typed and filed away, with 21st-century forensic techniques. The past and present had worked together to reveal the truth, just as Ellen Harmon had believed they would if someone cared enough to look. As Detective Wells often told the new investigators who joined the cold case unit, time isn't the enemy of truth. Indifference is. The Blackwood brothers had counted on indifference, on people forgetting, on evidence degrading, on witnesses dying or moving away. They had nearly gotten away with their crimes, protected by the passage of decades and the limitations of their era. But they hadn't counted on the persistence of memory, the preservation of evidence, the advancement of technology, or the dedication of investigators who refused to let the dust of time conceal the truth forever. They hadn't counted on someone finding that key ring with the peace symbol charm and the faded JH tag, half buried at the edge of the forest behind the tavern, nearly 4 decades after it had fallen from Jessica Harmon's pocket as the brothers carried her body to its temporary grave. Such small things, a key ring, a hairbrush, an 8-track tape still in the player of a hidden car, had ultimately revealed the truth that the Blackwood brothers had tried so hard to bury. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally come to Pinewood Creek, bringing with it both the pain of confirmed loss and the peace of resolution. For the families of the victims, for the investigators who had never given up, and for a community that had lived for decades in the shadow of unsolved disappearances, that resolution was both an ending and a beginning. An ending to uncertainty, to false hope, to unanswered questions. A beginning of healing, of remembrance, of moving forward with the knowledge that the truth, no matter how long buried, would eventually find its way to the light. In the memorial garden where the Crossroads Tavern once stood, visitors often left small tokens of remembrance, flowers, photographs, handwritten notes. But perhaps the most fitting tributes were the teaching credentials left by recipients of the Jessica Harmon Memorial Scholarship, young educators fulfilling the dream that Jessica herself had never had the chance to realize. They came to the garden before departing for their teaching assignments in rural communities or their Peace Corps postings in distant countries, leaving copies of their credentials weighted down with stones against the Oregon wind, a promise fulfilled across the decades, a life's purpose honored by those who came after, a reminder that though justice had been delayed, Jessica Harmon's dreams had not been forgotten. And in the bronze plaque that told her story to visitors who had perhaps never heard her name before, her graduation photograph smiled out at the world she had been so eager to explore. Eternally young, forever 22, her story now complete. No longer just another missing person, no longer just a file in a basement archive, but a symbol of how truth and justice can transcend time if we care enough to keep looking. The disturbing case of the Blackwood brothers, too dark for sensationalized streaming services, had finally reached its conclusion. The brothers, who had served more than whiskey to travelers, had been exposed, their crimes revealed, their victims given the dignity of identification and proper burial. The secrets they had kept for nearly 4 decades had been unearthed along with the remains of those they had harmed, bringing an end to one of the longest-running deceptions in criminal history. In Pinewood Creek and beyond, the lesson of the Harmon case echoed through the halls of justice. No matter how much time passes, no matter how deeply buried the evidence may be, the truth waits patiently to be discovered by those dedicated enough to search for it. Justice, though delayed, need not be denied. Not if we remember, not if we persist, not if we care enough to look beyond the dust of passing years to find the truth that lies beneath.